Call 911. Now she's turning blue." Bernard Kellerman's voice cut through the silence as his mop clattered against the marble floor and he bolted forward. Gasps erupted across the executive boardroom only moments before Alexandra Ashcroft, the billionaire CEO of Ashcroft Holdings, had been commanding the room, her voice crisp and authoritative as she presented quarterly projections. Then, without warning, she stopped, her fingers clutched at her chest. Breath catching the room froze as her body jerked twice before crumpling to the polished floor. Nobody moved at first. The executive stood paralyzed. 7 figures in designer suits, each one costing more than Bernard earned in 3 months. "This has to be some kind of joke." Someone whispered, another voice cut through. "Somebody get security." But Bernard didn't wait. He shoved through the glass doors, pushing past clouds of expensive cologne and the sharp scent of fear. "Bernard." "What the hell are you doing?" a voice barked. "You're not authorized to be in here." Another executive snapped back off. "Now, I know CPR." Bernard shouted, his voice raw with urgency, but nobody seemed to hear him. Alexandra lay motionless on her side, one arm bent awkwardly beneath her lips, darkening from pink to a terrifying shade of purple. She wasn't breathing. Bernard dropped hard onto his knees beside her. "Miss Ashcroft, can you hear me?" His whisper trembled as panic clawed at his throat. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse. Nothing. His hands moved on autopilot. He had taken that free CPR course at the West Philadelphia Community Center months ago, only because they offered a meal voucher afterward. But now, in this moment, the instructor's steady voice echoed louder than the chaos surrounding him. If someone isn't breathing, you become their lungs. You become their heart. Bernard tilted her head back, pinched her nose shut, and bent down. "Is he kissing her?" Someone shrieked from behind. "That's absolutely disgusting. Get him away from her now." A sharp, brutal pain exploded across Bernard's back. Someone had struck him hard. Maybe a security baton, maybe an umbrella. The impact sent fire racing up his spine. He groaned, but his hands never left Alexandra's chest. He continued the rhythm. 2 rescue breaths, then back to compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another blow landed, this time on his shoulder blade. The pain was blinding, but Bernard kept counting, kept pressing. "You filthy janitor, how dare you touch her?" Someone hissed. The boardroom descended into absolute chaos around him. Voices overlapping, security radios crackling, footsteps pounding. But Bernard remained locked in place. His arms screamed, his back throbbed, his vision blurred with sweat and tears. But he refused to stop. "Don't die," he whispered through gritted teeth. "Don't you dare die like this." 25, 26, 27. Someone grabbed his shoulder, trying to yank him backward. Bernard twisted free and resumed compressions, his whole body shaking with exhaustion. Then he leaned down, gave 2 more breaths, and suddenly Alexandra's chest convulsed violently. She coughed a horrible choking sound and then sucked in air like someone breaking through the surface of deep water. Her eyelids fluttered weakly. Bernard collapsed backward, his entire body trembling uncontrollably. His back was on fire. His shoulders felt like shattered glass. His hands were completely numb. But she was breathing. He had saved her. The executives swarmed around Alexandra, now stumbling over each other in panicked confusion. "Miss Ashcroft? Alexandra, can you hear us? Stay with us?" Someone shouted. The boardroom doors burst open, and paramedics rushed in, their equipment rattling. They immediately took over, lifting Alexandra onto a stretcher with practiced efficiency. One paramedic turned back, scanning the room. "Who started CPR? Who kept her alive?" "I did," Bernard managed to say, his voice barely audible. He didn't get a chance to explain further before a tall man with silver hair and a cold expression stepped forward. His badge read, "Tyler Brigham, Chief Financial Officer." His face twisted with open disgust. "What's your name?" The CFO demanded, his tone sharp as broken glass. "Bernard Kellerman." Bernard answered, forcing himself to stand straight. "I'm a janitor here. You put your mouth on Miss Ashcroft?" the man said, as if Bernard had committed an unforgivable crime rather than saved a human life. "She wasn't breathing," Bernard replied quietly, his voice steady. "Despite everything, I'll be reviewing the security footage immediately." Brigham snapped, "You need to leave this building right now and do not return until you're contacted." Bernard's throat tightened painfully. His back still throbbed where he'd been struck twice. He looked around the room at every single executive whose boss he had just saved from dying right in front of them. Not one "thank you," not one nod of acknowledgement, not even eye contact. Bernard bent down, slowly picked up his yellow cleaning bucket with trembling hands and pushed it toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. The wheels squeaked in the terrible silence. Bernard had no idea that the moment he walked out of that boardroom, something was already unfolding behind the scenes. Something that would change everything about his life forever. If you want to know what happens next, stay with this story because the truth behind Alexandra Ashcroft's collapse is going to shake everything you thought you knew. That night, Bernard sat hunched over in a hard plastic bus seat, surrounded by strangers, his back curved inward as though he were trying to disappear completely into himself. City lights blurred past the scratched window, stretching into long, distorted lines that reflected in his tired, hollow eyes. By the time the bus finally dropped him off in his neighborhood, darkness had swallowed everything whole. The air carried only the distant rumble of a freight train and the bright laughter of kids playing street baseball in the alley sounds that felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Molly ran to meet him at the door, barefoot, her worn teddy bear clutched tight against her chest. "You're home really late," she said. Her small voice edged with worry. "Are you okay, Daddy? I'm okay, sweetheart." Bernard lied a lie he had become far too skilled at telling just a really crazy day at work. Dinner was reheated macaroni and cheese and leftover stir-fried vegetables that had lost all flavor. Molly chattered excitedly about her day at school, and Bernard nodded along, though his mind remained trapped inside that freezing boardroom. When Janet Holloway, the neighbor who watched Molly during his night shifts, finally waved goodbye and headed home, Bernard forced a smile, even though his face felt like stone. When Molly fell asleep, he lay down on the thin mattress staring up at the ceiling, listening to the heater sputter and cough. In the corner, his fingers brushed against the bruise spreading across his back. Sharp and throbbing, he closed his eyes, but the image replayed endlessly, like a film stuck on repeat, Alexandra Ashcroft lying unconscious beneath his hands. He had saved a woman's life, and yet all anyone saw was a poor janitor, a struggling single father who had dared to touch a billionaire. He didn't know that moment. The exact moment he breathed life back into someone slipping toward death was about to turn his entire world upside down, just not in any way he could have imagined. The next morning, Bernard Kellerman stood outside the Ashcroft Holdings Tower, wearing the same faded gray uniform he had worn for the past 3 months. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, its pale amber light spilling across the plaza in soft waves. He tightened his grip on his lunch bag, a crumpled plastic grocery sack holding a peanut butter sandwich, a bruised apple, and the fragile hope that maybe things could just go back to normal. He took a deep breath and walked toward the revolving glass doors. But before his hand could touch the polished handle, an arm shot out blocking his path. "Sir, you can't enter," the security guard said, his tone flat, emotionless. Bernard blinked in confusion. "What do you mean I work here night shift? 22nd floor, I've been here for months." The guard didn't even look at him. "I was instructed not to let you inside." A cold shiver ran down Bernard's spine. "Why, what did I do wrong? Contact Human Resources," the guard replied, already turning away as if the conversation were finished. Bernard stood frozen at the entrance, morning wind slicing through his thin jacket as streams of office workers flowed past him without a glance. He felt like a shadow visible when working, invisible when it mattered most. He circled around to the side entrance, clinging to a sliver of hope that this was just some kind of administrative mistake. Maybe someone forgot to update his shift access. Maybe they needed to speak with him about the CPR incident. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding at the service desk. The night shift supervisor glanced up, surprised Bernard Kellerman. "Wait right here." Bernard waited in the narrow hallway beside a row of staff lockers. His name was still scrawled on locker number 7 in crooked black marker, familiar and somehow comforting. 10 long minutes passed. Then the supervisor returned, holding a sealed envelope in one hand. His face was completely blank. "You're terminated." He said the words hit Bernard like a sledgehammer. Terminated. Bernard repeated the word slowly, as if saying it out loud might change its meaning. But why? What exactly did I do? The supervisor shrugged his shoulders. "I don't have details. HR said it's for inappropriate conduct involving senior personnel. That's all they told me." Bernard's hands trembled violently as he tore open the envelope. Inside was a termination letter and his final paycheck. No severance package, no explanation beyond a single cold phrase, "Employment terminated immediately." The words "inappropriate conduct" echoed inside Bernard's skull, like an alarm bell that wouldn't stop ringing. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, in that narrow, dimly lit hallway. The door closing behind him, with the finality of a courtroom verdict, back outside the world continued, as if nothing had happened. People in expensive suits sipped their lattes, taxi horns blared, phones buzzed endlessly, and Bernard walked through it all like a ghost. He couldn't remember how many blocks he walked, everything blurred together into shapeless noise. "They think I did something wrong. They think I—" He collapsed onto a bus stop bench, his legs finally giving out beneath him. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from a coworker. It was a screenshot from the staff group chat. See, that janitor creep was all over Miss Ashcroft. When she passed out, looked like he was kissing her. Another message appeared disgusting. Was that assault? Bernard's chest tightened. His fingers went ice cold. They had twisted everything CPR, the breaths that brought her back to life. They had turned it into something sick, something criminal. His phone buzzed again. Another screenshot this time, a blurry still frame from the security footage, but it was clear enough to destroy him. Bernard leaning down over Alexandra Ashcroft, a moment of saving a life transformed into damning evidence. Bernard let the phone slip from his hand onto his lap above him. Looming over the bus stop was a massive billboard showing Alexandra Ashcroft smiling confidently beside the company's slogan, "Integrity, Vision, Leadership." He felt nauseous. The bus ride home was a blur. The dim apartment in West Philadelphia felt colder than ever. Molly ran out to greet him. "You're home early." "Daddy, that's nice." They let me go, sweetheart," Bernard said. Forcing the words out, her eyes went wide with confusion. "Why, what happened? I don't really know, baby." He managed a weak smile. "Just a big misunderstanding. I'm sure it'll be okay." Janet watched him from the kitchen counter, the television muted in the background. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Bernard." "I'm fine." He lied again. "Just really tired, that's all." Night fell slowly. He lay flat on his back, staring into the darkness, the heater sputtering like it was struggling to breathe somewhere down the hallway. An argument erupted, followed by a child crying softly. Life just kept going, except Bernard's felt like it had stopped completely. He turned his phone back on. Messages flooded in. Immediately a voicemail from someone at the service department. "Hey, I don't know what happened exactly, but people are saying you did something really inappropriate with Miss Ashcroft. Maybe you should just stay quiet for a while." He powered the phone off and let it drop onto the mattress. Inappropriate, such a convenient word when people wanted to believe the worst. Bernard closed his eyes tightly, remembering that exact moment when Alexandra's chest jerked violently back to life beneath his hands. That first desperate breath returning to her lungs, he had saved someone, and now the world was treating him like his hands had been too poor, too dirty, too worthless to have that right. He buried his face in the pillow and finally let the tears come saving. Someone should have been a good thing. It should have been celebrated. But in this city, in this world, it had erased his entire existence tomorrow. He would have to start looking for another job, any job that would take him knock on doors, beg for shifts, clean whatever place would hire someone with his reputation. But tonight, the weight of injustice was crushing, and he had absolutely no way of knowing that high above the city, in a penthouse glowing with soft golden lights, Alexandra Ashcroft had just woken up gasping from a nightmare, clutching her chest, heart racing, the echo of a voice pulling her back from darkness. She just didn't know his name yet. Alexandra Ashcroft sat rigid on the edge of her king-size bed, her body soaked through with cold sweat. Early morning light filtered through sheer curtains casting pale gold across the penthouse. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs as though trying to escape her chest. The nightmare had returned. This was the fourth night in a row in the dream. She stood suspended in absolute darkness, suffocating her arms, reaching desperately into nothing. No light, no sound, only an endless void swallowing everything. Then it came again, the voice, a man's voice shaking but unwavering, slicing through the blackness. Come on, breathe, come back to me every time she jolted awake, gasping like she'd been dragged from deep water. And every time the name of the man behind that voice slipped through her fingers before she could hold on to it, leaving only a strange, aching familiarity in her chest. Alexandra rubbed her face, took one more steadying breath, and stood walking barefoot across cool marble floors into the kitchen. The coffee machine beeped softly, the brew scheduled perfectly. As always, her assistant made sure every detail was flawless down to the minute, as rich coffee aroma filled the air. Alexandra leaned against the counter, eyes drifting toward the city below. Philadelphia was waking up beneath her taxis, weaving bicycles, dodging pedestrians, street vendors setting up carts on corners, and she stood 30 floors above it all, sealed away by glass money and silence. But this morning, something felt deeply wrong. She picked up her phone, scrolling through emails, contract approvals, press briefings, and interview requests from a public relations firm. Nothing mentioned the incident. She opened the Ashcroft Holdings internal portal. Still nothing. Her brow furrowed tightly. Someone had saved her life. The doctors had been absolutely clear. She had suffered sudden cardiac arrest. Survival rates without immediate intervention were below 10%, meaning someone had kept her heart beating, breath by breath, until paramedics arrived. And yet nobody had told her who it was. Her executives had been polite, but evasive when she asked the situation has been handled. Miss Ashcroft, we've taken appropriate internal measures. Those answers made her skin prickle uncomfortably, who had placed their hands on her chest, who had pressed their mouth to hers, breathing life back into her lungs every time she closed her eyes. Her mind returned to that dream, that voice, rough with effort, but absolutely steady, pulling her back from the edge. She could almost feel those hands again, the hard pressure against her ribs, the warmth of breath near her face. Who was he? And why wouldn't anyone tell her? Alexandra Ashcroft was not the type of person to be kept in the dark, especially not in her own company, and certainly not about her own survival. She picked up her phone and dialed Marcus, her head of security. Marcus. She said the moment he answered, I want the security footage from the boardroom on the morning of the incident. Ma'am, HR has already reviewed the footage. Legal has a copy on file. I didn't ask who reviewed it. Alexandra's voice sharpened. I want it in my inbox right now. Understood, yes, ma'am, immediately. She ended the call and turned back toward the window. This time, the glass only reflected pale mist and her own face staring back at her. She looked exhausted, drained, distant, like someone who had been pulled back from the edge without ever knowing who reached out to grab her, a woman whose life had been returned, but not the truth. 20 minutes later, the email arrived. Alexandra opened the video file on her laptop screen. She saw herself captured by the cold, indifferent eye of a surveillance camera, standing at the head of a long glass conference table, gesturing confidently mid-presentation. Then she stuttered. One hand flew to her chest. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Her body wavered, then crumpled to the floor like a marionette with cut strings. People around her jumped to their feet. Someone screamed. Another looked around wildly, but nobody stepped toward her. Then the door at the far end of the room flew open. A man in a gray janitor's uniform entered, pushing a mop bucket. Alexandra leaned closer to the screen. At first he looked startled, but the moment he saw her on the ground, he dropped everything and lunged forward without a second of hesitation. He knelt beside her, checked for a pulse, his hands moving fast, urgent, practiced. He pinched her nose, performed rescue breaths, then locked his fingers over her sternum and began compressions, counting each one aloud. She watched his face closely, the clenched jaw, the tears welling in his eyes, the expression of raw fear mixed with absolute determination. He ignored the shouts erupting behind him, the pointing fingers, the moving lips. She could read some of them, disgusting. What is he doing? Someone stop him. He focused on one thing, only keeping her alive. Then she saw it. Another man approached Tyler Brigham, her chief financial officer. His face twisted with anger and disgust. He grabbed the janitor's shoulder and yanked him backward. Alexandra hit pause. Her hands were shaking. She forced herself to watch the rest of the footage in silence. The janitor was escorted out of the room like a criminal. No handshake, no acknowledgement, no thank you. He had saved her life and been punished for it. Alexandra stood slowly, her chest tightening. Not from her heart condition, but from something else rising inside her fury. She called again. "Marcus," she said, her voice now low and cold as steel. "Where is Bernard Kellerman?" "Ma'am, the man in the video, the janitor. What happened to him?" There was a brief silence. He was terminated by HR, Miss Ashcroft. There were certain allegations, raised allegations. Alexandra nearly hissed the word. "He saved my life, ma'am." There were concerns about optics, liability, potential, media, risk. Then listen very carefully. Alexandra said each word sharp and deliberate. "Find him his address, his file, everything I wanted all on my desk before noon today. But Miss Ashcroft, do it now." She hung up, exhaling slowly. Her pristine kitchen, suddenly, felt unbearably empty for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed. She felt something crack deep beneath her sternum. Not pain, shame. Far below in distant West Philadelphia, Bernard Kellerman had no idea he didn't know she had watched the footage, didn't know she was staring at his face on a screen, didn't know the world that had crushed him once was about to tremble again, but he would know very soon. 3 days passed and Bernard Kellerman still hadn't found work. Morning slipped by in heavy silence. The only sound an old red pen he'd found, wedged in the sofa cushions, scratching circles around job listings in the classifieds afternoons. He walked door to door, laundromats, diners, cleaning companies, anywhere that might pay enough to keep the lights on in his small apartment. But everywhere the answer was the same. A hesitant look, a whispered conversation, then a polite shake of the head, colder than the winter air outside. By the morning of the 4th day, Bernard Kellerman's name had become a rumor, spreading through the neighborhood like smoke. At the laundromat on the corner, a young woman folding towels glanced over at him and said quietly, "You're that guy from that building, right? The one who she trailed off when he looked up? Never mind, sorry, it's nothing." "It's okay," Bernard said softly, forcing something close to a smile. "You can say it. I'm the man who tried to save someone and got fired for it." She pressed her lips together, her voice dropping, even lower. "People are saying you did more than just save her." Bernard didn't ask what more. Then that meant he already knew the internet had taken his CPR and twisted it into something filthy. Trashy blogs ran headlines. Janitor couldn't keep his hands to himself. Crossing the line with unconscious CEO, someone had leaked a still frame from security footage, blurry and grainy, but just clear enough to plant doubt. The image of him bent over performing rescue breaths had become evidence against him back home. The small apartment smelled like stale carpet and reheated coffee. Janet Holloway sat by the window, reading glasses perched on her nose, holding a large print newspaper. City Council rejected the minimum wage raise again, she muttered, then looked up. Have you eaten anything today? Not yet, Bernard said, rinsing out a mug in the sink. Let me make something for Molly first. The little girl shuffled into the kitchen, hair messy, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Daddy, are you going to work today? Not today, sweetheart, Bernard answered gently, crouching down to her level. I'm taking a little break right now. Molly frowned. Miss Janet said, People are being mean to you. Why, Bernard brushed a strand of hair from her face. Sometimes people get scared of things they don't understand, but everything's going to be okay, I promise. Janet sighed heavily and folded the newspaper. Son, you can't fight people who write the stories. They always win in the end. I don't want to fight them, Bernard said quietly. I just want them to tell the truth. That afternoon, he took the bus to a small cleaning service on 18th Street. The owner, a heavy-set man in a wrinkled dress shirt that smelled like cigar smoke, glanced over Bernard's paperwork, then set it down on the desk. You used to work at Ashcroft Holdings. Yes, sir, Bernard replied. The man nodded slowly, crossing his thick arms. I heard about that situation. I can't afford that kind of attention here. I'm sorry. Bernard's throat went dry. Attention. You mean saving someone's life, the man said bluntly. Controversy clients don't like trouble. You should try somewhere else. When Bernard stepped back outside, the sky had darkened wind, slicing through his thin coat like knives. He walked along cracked sidewalks toward the bus stop. A group of teenagers stood outside a convenience store, phones glowing blue in the dim light. As he passed, one of them nudged his friend and spoke loud enough for Bernard to hear clearly. Yo, that's him, that janitor guy. I saw the clip, bro, was straight up kissing that billionaire lady. For real laughter exploded behind him, chasing Bernard down the block by the time he reached the bus stop. His eyes were burning. He sat down, head bowed, arms wrapped tightly around himself as if he could physically hold the pieces together. When he got home, Janet was on the phone. Her voice tense and hushed. Seeing him, she cupped her hand over the receiver. It's your sister, she said quietly. People at church are talking. They saw some video online. Bernard closed his eyes. Of course they had that night. He tried deleting his social media accounts, but every time he did, another fake profile appeared with his picture and brutal captions. Single dad, hunting billionaires. Man who assaulted female CEO looking for payout. He turned the phone off completely and sat in the dark. The silence was so deep the hum of the refrigerator felt like the only sound left in the universe when he finally lay down beside Molly. His body felt like lead. His back still ached from the blows he'd taken that day in the boardroom. He pressed his hand over the bruise, remembering the sharp crack of impact, the breath forced from his lungs. Justice isn't blind, he whispered. It just refuses to look down in the middle of the night. His phone rang. Bernard jolted awake, fumbling to answer Mr. Kellerman. A woman's voice, sharp, cold, scripted. Yes, this is he. This is Human Resources from Ashcroft Holdings. Calling our internal investigation is complete. His heart lurched. So, does that mean I can come back? Your employment has been terminated effective immediately. The woman cut in flatly. The internal review determined your conduct to be inappropriate. We will not be pursuing charges, but we strongly advise you not to return to the premises. Bernard shot upright, frozen. Inappropriate, I was performing CPR. She wasn't breathing, the decision is final. Mr. Kellerman, your last paycheck will be mailed to you. The call ended, the line went dead. Clean and merciless, as if he had never existed at all. Bernard sat there for a long moment, phone still pressed to his ear, staring into darkness. Molly shifted beside him, mumbling something about pancakes in her sleep. He turned to look at her, his chest aching. What was he supposed to tell her in the morning that her father lost his job for saving someone's life? That the truth doesn't matter when the person telling it is poor and invisible. Bernard leaned his head back against the headboard, his eyes burning. God, he whispered into the empty room. If you're listening, what am I supposed to do now? Outside, thunder rumbled low. Rain began drumming against the window. The leaky gutter tapped out a steady rhythm like a heartbeat, mocking, tireless, unrelenting on the other side of the city in a brightly lit penthouse. Alexandra Ashcroft sat in front of her laptop the video had finished playing, but the image of Bernard kneeling beside her was still seared into her mind. She saw the fear etched across his face, the determination blazing in his eyes, the courage, and then the horror as he was dragged away like a criminal. She hit pause again, leaned back in her chair, shoulders rigid, jaw tight. She had built $1 billion empire on decisive choices and unwavering faith in systems. But this had slipped past her like smoke, and it had nearly destroyed an innocent man. Her jaw clenched. Find him, she murmured into the quiet room before this goes any further. Alexandra Ashcroft didn't call her driver, didn't alert her security team. She pulled on jeans, a plain sweater, grabbed her own car keys. The black Mercedes glided through the city like a shadow moving west, watching glass and steel towers gradually give way to old brick buildings, peeling murals, windows boarded up with warped plywood. It had been years since she'd driven herself anywhere, especially to a neighborhood like this, but somehow it felt right. The neighborhood where Bernard lived existed in a completely different world from the empire of glass and gold. She commanded potholes, rattled her wheels. Kids played soccer on muddy lots, chasing each other around rusted cars. A man sold hot dogs from a battered cart, steam rising in thick clouds against the biting cold. She found the address, a low brown building with peeling paint and a sagging metal staircase clinging to the side. She parked, stepped out, and December air slashed at her neck like razors. She climbed the stairs and knocked a few seconds of silence past, then the door creaked open. Slowly, a little girl appeared, hair tied back, hastily wearing a t-shirt far too thin for the weather. Her eyes went wide. You're the lady from the billboard," she whispered. "I'm looking for Bernard." Alexandra said, softening her voice. "Does he live here?" The girl's face tightened with worry. "He's really sick," she said quietly. "He won't get up. I tried making him soup. I even tried giving him his medicine, but nothing worked. He just keeps saying he's tired. Then he lies back down again." Alexandra's throat tightened. "How long has he been like this since he lost his job?" The girl replied, tears pooling in her eyes. "He kept saying it wasn't fair. Then he just stopped talking." Alexandra gently pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was tiny walls, faded and cracked, a heater rumbling weakly in the corner. Bernard lay curled on a thin mattress in the corner, wrapped in 2 worn blankets. His face was gaunt cheeks, hollow breathing, frighteningly shallow. She knelt beside him. "Bernard," she whispered. "It's me, Alexandra Ashcroft." He didn't move. She took his hand. It burned with fever. "Call an ambulance," she shouted toward the hallway. Now the little girl stood frozen, clutching a ragged teddy bear, eyes wide with fear. Alexandra squeezed Bernard's hand harder. "You saved my life," she said, her voice cracking. "Now it's my turn to save yours." When the distant wail of sirens began echoing up the street, she looked down at the man who had pulled her back from death and understood one thing with absolute clarity. This time she would not let him slip away. The ambulance pulled up outside the building lights. Spinning silently in the early morning darkness, paramedics moved quickly, asking sharp-clipped questions. Alexandra barely registered the moment Bernard's limp body was lifted onto the stretcher. All she knew was that she climbed into the ambulance after him without a second thought, ignoring the neighbors peeking through curtains and cracked doors. Inside the vehicle, a paramedic clipped an oxygen monitor to Bernard's finger and wrapped a blood pressure cuff around his thin arm. Severe dehydration fever above 103, shallow breathing. The paramedic said, "How long has this been going on?" Alexandra gripped the edge of her seat. "I don't know exactly. I just found him like this." "This isn't sudden," the paramedic muttered as he hung an IV bag from the hook above. "This is systemic stress, exhaustion, malnutrition." His body shut down. The ambulance lurched as it turned onto a main road. Alexandra glanced down at Bernard's face, pale, sunken beads of sweat dotting his forehead. She reached out carefully, slipping her hand into his. Avoiding the IV line, his fingers didn't move, but she didn't let go. "You fought to keep me alive," she murmured softly. "Don't quit now, hold on." The paramedic said suddenly, eyes widening, "You're Alexandra Ashcroft." Alexandra nodded stiffly. The paramedic looked from her to Bernard, then back again. "He's the one." "Yes," she said simply. The paramedic didn't say anything more, but his expression shifted, something like respect. 20 minutes later, they arrived at a private medical center on the north side, one of the best hospitals in the city. Alexandra had called ahead. A full team of doctors and nurses waited at the emergency entrance. They moved with swift precision, pushing Bernard through the double doors. Alexandra followed close behind until a nurse gently lifted a hand. "We'll take care of him." "Miss Ashcroft, please wait here." She nodded, stepping back reluctantly. Her eyes stayed fixed on the stretcher until it disappeared beyond the swinging doors. The waiting room was nearly perfect. Soft leather chairs, warm recess lighting a piano in the corner, playing gentle jazz. But to Alexandra, everything felt submerged, muffled, distant. She sat, stood, paced, sat again. She called Fiona Redford, her legal assistant. "He's at Northside Medical. Cancel everything on my schedule for the next 2 days and bring his daughter Molly here immediately. She's alone at the apartment." "I'll handle it right away," Fiona said without hesitation. When Molly arrived with a social worker about an hour later, Alexandra was standing by the tall windows watching thin snowflakes drift across the Philadelphia skyline. She turned when she heard the girl's small voice. "Is my dad going to be okay?" Alexandra knelt down to meet Molly at eye level. "The doctors are taking very good care of him. Your dad is incredibly strong. He saved my life once, remember? And I believe with everything in me that he can pull through this." Molly nodded, trying hard to be brave, clutching her teddy bear tightly. "I made him soup, but he wouldn't eat it. I tried really hard." "You did more than your best." Alexandra said gently, "You took care of him the way he took care of me." A nurse appeared at the doorway. "Miss Ashcroft, you can see him now." Alexandra stood, took Molly's small hand in hers, and followed the nurse down a quiet hallway into a private room. Bernard lay in the hospital bed, an oxygen tube beneath his nose, IV fluids dripping steadily into his arm. His chest rose and fell. Slowly, steadily, he's going to pull through. The nurse said softly, "Severe exhaustion, dehydration, malnutrition. His immune system crashed under prolonged stress, but he's responding well. His vitals are improving." Alexandra exhaled a breath. She hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank you," she said quietly. Molly stepped carefully to the bedside and gently placed her teddy bear on her father's chest. "I'm taking care of you now, Daddy," she whispered. Alexandra pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. She stayed there for hours. At one point, Molly fell asleep, curled up in the corner under a hospital blanket. A nurse brought in soup and crackers. Alexandra barely touched hers. She just sat watching Bernard, her mind spinning through layers of guilt, doubt, responsibility. She remembered the board meeting that morning, the way nobody had looked at him twice, the way even she hadn't acknowledged his existence. He had entered that room like he was invisible. And yet that invisible man had been the only one to save her life. It hadn't just been CPR. It had been an act of defiance, standing against fear, facing down a system that expected him to bow his head, stay silent, disappear. She couldn't undo what had happened, but she could and absolutely would change everything that came next. Hours passed, night settled in completely. The only sounds were steady monitor beeps and Molly's soft breathing. Then, without warning, Bernard stirred his eyelids, fluttered fingers twitching slightly. Alexandra shot to her feet, Bernard. His head tilted slowly, eyes opening, blinking several times, trying to focus. "Where am I?" he rasped. "You're in the hospital," she said gently, leaning closer. "You collapsed, but you're safe now." His brow furrowed in confusion. Why are you here?" She knelt beside the bed, her voice trembling slightly. "Because I watched the footage, Bernard. All of it, every single second I saw exactly what you did. You saved my life, and they punished you for it. I am so deeply sorry." Tears welled in his eyes. "They said I assaulted you." "I know," she replied, her jaw tightening. "They lied, and I let them lie on my behalf. But that ends right now. It doesn't matter," he said, turning away, blinking hard. "I'm just a janitor. People like me, nobody believes what we say, no matter how true it is." "I believe you," she said slowly, firmly. "Not just because I saw the video, but because I felt it in that moment. You were the only person who acted, the only one who didn't turn away." Bernard looked back at her, his voice weak but steady. "Then help me," he said, "not just with doctors or hospital bills. Help me be seen. Help my daughter grow up in a world where doing the right thing doesn't mean losing everything." Alexandra nodded once, then again, more firmly. "I will." She stood looking at him for a long moment, then whispered, "You're not invisible anymore." Morning light slipped gently through hospital curtains, drawing quiet streaks across pale green walls. Bernard was asleep, his breathing steady now, his face no longer ashen but softer, warmer, alive beside him. Alexandra Ashcroft sat in an armchair, elbows resting on her knees, eyes never leaving the man who had shaken her entire world simply by doing what nobody else had dared to do. All night she hadn't left the room. Guilt still clung to her shoulders like a wet blanket. Heavy cold suffocating for a woman who had built a billion-dollar empire on hard decisions and respect for chain of command. This had slipped through her fingers like smoke, and it had nearly destroyed an entire human life. She took out her phone and opened Bernard's file Fiona had worked through the night, piecing together everything she could find, stitching together a complete picture the rest of the world had carelessly thrown away. Name Bernard James Kellerman. Age 34, education high school diploma. 1 year community college nursing program, dropped out due to financial hardship. Employment history, cleaning services, part-time. Elderly care food delivery family, 1 daughter, Molly ex-wife, Charlotte Reed custody revoked by court 3 years ago, address West Philadelphia, known for high crime rates, decaying infrastructure, forgotten by the city. There were notes from previous landlords, an eviction notice filed. He had been 2 months behind on rent. His electricity had been shut off. The week before all of this happened, after he saved her life. Alexandra swallowed hard. She stood and stepped into the hallway. A nurse pushed a cart past and nodded politely. Alexandra walked to a quiet corner near the family waiting area, leaned against the wall, pulled out her phone, and called Fiona. "Yes, Miss Ashcroft." Fiona answered almost immediately. "Send 2 cars to West Philadelphia, 1 to pick up his daughter, 1 for the neighbor who's been helping them. I want them moved to temporary housing, fully furnished, safe, near a good school, understood." And call Dr. Morrison. Alexandra added, "I want Janet Holloway, the neighbor, to have a full medical exam today. Comprehensive. I'll arrange it immediately. And 1 more thing." Fiona Alexandra said, her voice softening, "Make sure there's a small bed ready in the new place, just in case Molly gets scared." Sleeping alone, there was a brief pause. "I understand," Ma'am Alexandra hung up and returned to the room. Bernard was awake now, propped up slightly on pillows, his eyes still heavy, but far clearer than the night before. Molly sat beside him, legs swinging off the chair, coloring intently with pencils a nurse had found somewhere. When Alexandra entered, the girl looked up and beamed brightly. "Hi, Miss Ashcroft. Hi, Molly." Alexandra smiled. "How's your dad doing? He's way better now." Molly chirped proudly, holding up her drawing. "He smiled when I showed him this." Alexandra turned to Bernard. "You're back with us, aren't you?" "It's not like I had anywhere else to go," he replied with dry humor, though the corner of his mouth twitched upward. "You really watched the whole footage." "Every second of it," Alexandra confirmed. "I watched you fight to save my life while everyone else stood frozen. Then I watched them treat you like you were a criminal." "Bernard, I am truly sorry." Bernard tilted his head back, staring at the ceiling. "Sorry doesn't change what they did to me." "No," she agreed, "but it's a starting point, and so is this." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a neatly folded sheet of paper. "This is an official statement signed and notarized under my name, clearing your record completely. It states that your actions were emergency medical intervention, life-saving measures, and entirely appropriate under the circumstances. No misconduct, no violation, nothing." Hesitated before taking it, his fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded the page. His eyes scanned each line, slowly, his lips parting. "And there's more," Alexandra continued. "I've moved your daughter and your neighbor to a safe, fully furnished apartment free of charge until you're completely back on your feet. And I want to offer you a position." He snapped his head up sharply. "What, no? You don't have to do that." "I do." She cut in, gently but firmly. "Because I allowed them to dismantle your life under my name. I can't erase what happened, but I can make absolutely certain that from now on you're never left standing alone again." He swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. "Why do you care now?" She fell silent for a moment, carefully choosing her words. "Because when I was on the edge of death, slipping away, I didn't see a janitor. I saw a man fighting with everything he had to keep me alive, and after I survived, I let the world erase you. That makes me complicit, and I refuse to be that person anymore." Molly looked up brightly and cut in. "I told you, Daddy, she's a good person." Bernard exhaled a sound somewhere between a laugh and surrender. "You've always been better at reading people than I have, kid." Alexandra smiled faintly. "There's one more thing. If you're willing to hear it, I want to offer you a role not in cleaning. You would be director of a new employee welfare program I'm launching at Ashcroft Holdings." Bernard's eyes went wide. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" "I want you to help design a system that ensures nobody gets left behind again, especially the people who keep the lights on and the floors clean, the people nobody sees. I want you to be the one to rebuild what I allowed to rot." He stared at her, completely stunned. "I don't have the qualifications for something like that." "You absolutely do," Alexandra said, stepping closer. "Because you understand in a way nobody else in that building can. You know what it feels like to be treated as invisible, and now you have the chance to change that for others." Bernard gripped the edge of the blanket tightly. "I need time to think about this." "Of course." She nodded gently. "Take all the time you need." She turned toward the door but paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Oh, Bernard, you saved me once," she said softly. "Maybe this is my chance to return the favor." The door closed quietly behind her. Bernard leaned his head back against the pillow. The official statement still in his trembling hand. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to believe that maybe this wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was only the beginning. 2 days later, Bernard crossed the threshold of the new apartment. For the first time, his legs still shook slightly. After days in the hospital, his right hand was bandaged where the IV had been, but all of that suddenly felt insignificant. He stood completely still in the middle of the living room, just taking it all in. Warm, golden light washed over the space. No more cracked peeling walls. No more flickering bulb that couldn't decide between on and off no more. Wheezing heater coughing in the corner. Instead, there was a comfortable beige sofa with clean cushions, a low wooden coffee table, a soft area rug, underfoot curtains that actually matched the walls. The apartment carried a faint scent of lemon, mixed with new fabric like the smell of a fresh start. Molly shot past him, eyes wide with wonder, laughter ringing out. "We have our own kitchen. Daddy, look. There's even cereal already in the cabinet." Bernard blinked rapidly, fighting the tears threatening to spill. Janet, their neighbor, stepped in, slowly behind them, leaning on the new walker the hospital had provided. Her back was still bent, her legs still stiff, but her eyes were brighter than they'd been in months. "Oh, my Lord," Janet muttered softly. "I haven't seen a place this clean and decent since your Aunt Beatrice's wedding years ago." Bernard laughed, the sound still a little shaky but genuine. The three of them stepped fully inside and closed the door, like closing an old, painful chapter for the first time in a very long time. They didn't feel like they were squatting somewhere they weren't wanted this time. This was home. On the kitchen counter sat a welcome package with his name written neatly on top beside it. A small glass vase holding white daisies. A card was tucked beneath the vase. "You deserve peace," signed AA. Bernard folded the card carefully and pressed it lightly against his chest, as if anchoring a fragile memory in the days since leaving the hospital. He hadn't seen Alexandra in person again, but her presence was everywhere. Private medical care for him and Janet, a professional moving company, pre-scheduled therapy sessions for Molly, the job offer still sitting unanswered in his email inbox. She didn't push, didn't call demanding a response. She simply opened a door and let him choose. And right now, that was what he valued most. He stepped into the kitchen, taking in the gleaming stainless steel appliances. Opening the refrigerator, he found a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a dozen eggs, more food at once than he'd had in weeks. Molly opened a cabinet and pulled out a brand new box of colored pencils. "There's drawing paper, too. Daddy, I can make real art again." Janet eased herself onto a bar stool at the kitchen counter, her sharp eyes sweeping the entire room. "Son, are you absolutely sure this isn't some kind of trap? No landlord is this generous without wanting something back." Bernard turned to face her. "She hasn't asked me for anything." Janet narrowed her eyes skeptically. Nobody gives this much without expecting something back sooner or later. Bernard was quiet for a few seconds before answering. Carefully, "She's not handing down charity. Janet, she's giving me back justice, and maybe this is her way of doing it." Janet snorted softly. "Justice is supposed to show up before they drag your name through the mud, not after everything's already broken." Bernard didn't argue. He didn't know how to anyway. He walked down the small hallway into the bedroom at the end, a queen-size bed with clean, crisp sheets, a wardrobe, a bedside lamp with a soft, warm glow. No moldy windows, no chipped plaster. Crumbling from the walls on the nightstand sat a small stack of books. Titles on leadership, employee welfare, and one about surviving public scandal. On the last book's cover, a sticky note was attached. "Page 47 once helped me AA." Bernard let out a faint, almost disbelieving chuckle, then sat slowly on the edge of the bed, running his hand over the soft comforter from the living room. Molly's bright voice drifted in. "Daddy, can I go downstairs later and see the little garden sweetheart?" he called back. "We have a lot of boxes to unpack first." Janet shuffled to the doorway, leaning heavily on her walker as she looked at him. "You really thinking seriously about taking that job?" Bernard looked up, meeting her gaze. "Honestly, I don't know yet. Just hearing about it scares me." Janet's voice softened unexpectedly. "You knelt down in the middle of a boardroom full of executives and faced death without your hands shaking, and now an office job terrifies you." "It's not the job itself," Bernard said quietly. It's being seen that scares me that night after Molly had fallen asleep in the twin bed with dinosaur sheets she'd picked excitedly from a catalog, and Janet was settled comfortably on the living room couch. Bernard stepped out onto the small balcony city. Lights glittered in the distance, not so far that he felt disconnected, but far enough to remind him how far he'd come in just a few days. He sat down in the wicker chair, pulled a light blanket around his shoulders, and let his thoughts flow freely. The injustice was still there. The rumors online hadn't vanished overnight. People still whispered his name at the corner store. His phone still buzzed occasionally with anonymous, cruel messages. But in this quiet moment, he felt something completely unfamiliar. Hope, not safety. Not yet. But the sense that things were still capable of changing. His phone buzzed softly. A new message from Alexandra Ashcroft. "No pressure at all, but I'd be honored if you'd come see the new office space. It's yours to shape. However you imagine it, start there." Below was an attachment, a photo of an empty office floor, wide windows, sunlight pouring through freshly painted walls, spotless floors waiting for the very first footsteps. Bernard stared at the image for a long time. He could almost see it in his mind, a place without front doors for the wealthy and back doors for the cleaners, a place where benefits meant more than a decorative bowl of fruit in the break room, a place where voices like his weren't just allowed to exist, but were actually needed. He typed back carefully, "I'll come take a look, one step at a time." His fingers hovered over the screen. Then he added, "Thank you for giving me room to breathe." He set the phone down, gently leaned back in the chair, and closed his eyes for the first time in weeks. Bernard fell asleep without waking in fear. Next Monday, Bernard stood outside the gleaming glass building in River North. The wind carried the rich smell of freshly roasted coffee, and the sidewalk was still glossy from morning rain. He adjusted his scarf and looked up at the sign, Ashcroft Holdings Executive Annex. Fiona's message was still clear in his mind. Third floor elevator on the right. She'll be waiting as he stepped into the marble lobby. Bernard felt eyes on him, but this time it wasn't suspicion or contempt. It was recognition. The security guard nodded respectfully at him. The receptionist smiled warmly. Just small gestures, but to Bernard, they were the kind of acknowledgement he had never truly experienced before. The elevator chimed softly, doors opening smoothly, lifting him toward a completely empty open floor, flooded with natural sunlight and a sweeping view of the river. In the distance, Alexandra Ashcroft stood by the tall windows, coffee cup in hand. "I was starting to wonder if you'd changed your mind," she said without turning around. "I almost did." Bernard admitted twice right before I walked out the door. "But I'm very glad you came anyway," she said, turning to face him. Bernard walked slowly around the space, taking it all in. "This place feels different, somehow less cold. That's intentional." She replied, "This entire floor is yours to design for the new department. Still trying to convince me to take the job," he said, raising an eyebrow. Alexandra smiled. "I just want you to know the door is open, and if anyone deserves to design an employee welfare program, it's someone who knows exactly what it feels like to be overlooked." Bernard stopped by the windows, looking out at the river glinting below boats, moving steadily beneath bridges. "I've never had an office before," he said quietly. "The only keys I ever owned were for a supply closet and a mop cabinet." "Then it's time you had a different kind of key," she said calmly. "Why are you really doing all of this?" he asked, this time looking directly at her. Alexandra didn't look away because when I was lying on that floor, hovering between life and death, I realized something I didn't deserve. Half the respect people gave me, not the way you did power. Without responsibility is just an illusion, and I've had enough of that illusion. She pulled out a thick sketch pad and a marker, placed them on the table. "All of this is yours, Bernard," she said simply. Bernard opened to the first page, completely blank. He took the pen, drew a breath, and began. "I want windows in every working room, real natural light. No more break rooms that look like broom closets, and I want a real welfare fund. Transportation support, childcare assistance, rent relief. Not just a couple of yoga classes staged for pretty photos. Alexandra scribbled notes quickly. You're demanding. I'm not here to demand. Bernard said, his voice steady and firm. I'm here to build an hour passed quickly. The sketch on the table filled with boxes, arrows, labeled sections, support office counseling rooms, a space where employees could safely wait for their kids, a quiet rest area specifically for night shift workers. So am I supposed to take this as you saying? Yes, Alexandra asked gently. I'm saying yes. Bernard nodded. Not because I want to work for you, but because I want to work for the people you and this entire system used to forget people exactly like me. That's the best. Yes, I've ever heard, she replied softly. Bernard paused at the doorway, turned back. Thank you, Alexandra. Not just for the job, but for choosing to see me. I should have done it sooner, she said quietly. We all see things too late sometimes. He smiled faintly. What matters is what we choose to do once we finally see them across the city, in a dim wood-paneled conference room lit only by warm yellow lamps. Tyler Brigham poured bourbon with a trembling hand. The news had already reached him, and it made him feel physically sick. Alexandra was building a brand new department, and she had just put that janitor in charge of it. Tyler glanced down at his phone. The headline hit him like a fist. Bernard Kellerman standing beside his daughter, smiling in the press release. Ashcroft appoints Bernard Kellerman as Director of Employee Welfare Initiative, a bold step toward workplace justice. Tyler's jaw clenched, hard veins standing out along his neck. For years, he had been the one carefully crafting this HR ecosystem. Quiet firings, hush money agreements, files shoved into the dark. And now a man from the supply closet had been handed a position Tyler had always seen as an extension of his own power. He dialed a number quickly. It's Brigham. I need something done quietly. Completely off the books. The voice on the other end was low and careful. Go on, find me anything on Bernard Kellerman. Old debts, sealed records, juvenile offenses, anything at all. I want him completely discredited. That's going to cost you. I didn't ask the price. Tyler growled. I asked if you could do it the next morning. Rain hammered the windows like impatient knocking. Bernard stood by the kitchen sink, holding a mug of cold coffee without even realizing it. There was a strange, uncomfortable feeling in his chest, like something was waiting for him just out of sight, and it wasn't good. His phone buzzed a message from Fiona. Call me immediately. Something's happening. Bernard dialed right away. There's been a leak. Fiona said without preamble. Your old eviction records, hospital bills, even a sealed juvenile misdemeanor. Someone's trying to publicly smear you. Bernard said the name softly without needing to think. Brigham Alexandra is furious. Fiona added, let her be, Bernard, replied his voice oddly calm. I'm not hiding anymore. When he arrived at the Ashcroft Annex later that morning, the air felt strung tight like a wire about to snap. Rumors had raced ahead of him by miles, but Bernard walked in with his head held high on his desk. Waiting for him was a bright bouquet of sunflowers and a handwritten card. The truth is always louder than the noise. Keep walking, AA within an hour. He requested an all-staff meeting for the annex. The room filled quickly. Administrative staff, security guards, cafeteria workers, maintenance crew, day shift and night shift cleaners. Bernard stood in front of them, with no notes, no slides, just his trembling hands and his voice. Some of you have probably already seen the headlines circulating. He began, There are people out there who want you to believe that a person's past is enough to erase their future. That one mistake or one messy record should be enough to silence them forever. He walked slowly along the front row, making eye contact. I don't believe that he stopped and looked at each face individually. Tired, curious, skeptical, hopeful. Yes, I've faced eviction. Yes, I've had overdue bills. Yes, when I was 16, I had a minor charge for stealing cough medicine. My mom was sick and we couldn't afford it. That record was sealed years ago. He drew a deep breath. I am not ashamed of any of that. Those things are part of who I am. This space was created for people who never get a seat at the big table. He continued, his voice growing stronger, for the ones who've cried alone in the supply closet and still walked out smiling the next day, for those who've been ignored, dismissed, treated as invisible but kept working anyway. He swept his gaze across the entire room. You don't have to be perfect to fight for justice. You just have to be willing to show up, and I'm standing here. There was a thick, heavy moment of silence. Then someone started clapping. Slowly, a second pair of hands joined in. Then a third within seconds. The entire room erupted into applause, rolling thunder, swelling into a rhythm that shook the walls across town. Alexandra sat with her legal team in a sleek, glass-walled conference room, a screen in front of them filled with emails, documents, screenshots, evidence of the smear campaign laid out clearly. I want his badge revoked. Alexandra said, her voice cold as steel. Today it's ready. Fiona replied, we were just waiting for your final sign-off, and one more thing. Alexandra continued, leaning forward. Anyone who targets Bernard Kellerman is targeting this company's core values, and they will answer directly to me 6 months later. Bernard stood on stage at a national conference on labor justice and workplace reform. This time, he wasn't holding a mop and bucket, but a presentation, a team, and his name printed clearly on the main speaker lineup. The employee welfare program he designed had officially launched across Ashcroft Holdings. In the first month alone, over 200 reports were submitted. 7 managers were terminated. 12 employees were promoted after unfair performance evaluations, were reviewed and corrected. Molly sat proudly in the front row legs, swinging eyes shining brightly, her smile impossible to hide. Janet, stronger now after months of consistent physical therapy, clapped the loudest every single time Bernard's name was mentioned. Alexandra chose a seat farther back in the audience, not to take any spotlight, but simply to listen. My name is Bernard Kellerman. He began, his voice low but absolutely steady, and I'm not the kind of flawless hero you usually see on motivational posters. A few soft laughs rippled through the audience. I don't have a spotless record. I wasn't born into wealth or privilege. I was a janitor, a single dad, a man who saw something deeply wrong and decided not to look away. I didn't decide to speak up because I wanted attention or recognition. I did it because there are real people being hurt every single day, ignored, manipulated, stripped of their voice. People exactly like me. If that makes me troublesome, then I sincerely hope more of us are willing to stand up and cause that kind of trouble. When he finished speaking, Molly didn't wait a single second. She ran straight onto the stage and threw her arms around him. You did so good, Daddy. Bernard laughed warmly, pulling her close. We did good, sweetheart. This is for all of us. Alexandra walked up quietly as applause still echoed through the hall. You've genuinely changed this company, Bernard, she said. Not just the policies, but the entire culture. We still have a long way to go, he replied honestly. Yes, but at least now we're walking in the right direction. She agreed. That night, Bernard sat on the balcony of their apartment, bigger, brighter, but still simple. He looked out at Philadelphia spread beneath him, city lights flickering like tiny, fragile promises. In the darkness, his phone buzzed a message from Fiona. Just got word 3 more companies reached out. They want to apply the model you built. Bernard smiled. The change was spreading. He typed back, let's do it one safe workplace at a time. Molly stepped out onto the balcony wrapped in a thick blanket. Are you cold, Daddy? No, sweetheart. He pulled her gently into his lap. I was just thinking about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us straight to the best things. Molly curled up against his chest, snuggling in. So are you happy now, Daddy? Bernard held his daughter tighter, looked out at the breathing city, and felt something settle deep in his chest. Yeah, baby, he said softly. Finally, I'm happy. They sat like that, father and daughter on their small balcony.